Here's a wild idea. What if Portuguese is the reason you struggle to understand it when people speak? Sounds backwards, but I want your help to test this theory because so many of you seem to improve your understanding of written Portuguese the more you read. However, the more you listen, the more frustrated you get. So with 3 tiny stories, we'll find out if reading first or while you listen is the primary cause why spoken Portuguese sounds like total gibberish. Before you help me test this, it's probably a good idea to explain why I'm making such a bold statement. There's 2 main reasons, plus my experience working with hundreds of Portuguese learners. To explain the first reason, I need to ask you a question. If you ever watched content with subtitles, did you notice you could read the text faster than you could hear the words being said? Everyone I've asked this confirmed. Reading is indeed faster. And what does this do to the listening muscle you want to build when learning Portuguese? Naturally, it gets lazy because by the time your brain processes the word said, you have already understood the meaning of the words you have read. Which means you will kind of ignore them, especially because they don't exactly match what you read. O que é que may sound like o que é que. Adults in particular tend to choose the easiest route. That's normal. What's also normal is to read and listen at the same time, which is precisely what my second argument is all about. I find reading gets in the way of your listening comprehension because if you combine both skills, as in listening to an audiobook while reading the text, you are dedicating 50% of your brain power to each skill. And as I just explained, if reading tends to be easier, that 50-50 split is probably more like a 70-30. Maybe you want to be fair to both reading and listening and develop the skills at the same time. But considering understanding spoken Portuguese is the toughest skill to master, then why not dedicate some time to focus on only that? Now, the reason I always say listening first is key with European Portuguese is because of what I keep seeing happening with my unschoolers. So I work with people who have some vocabulary and grammar under their belt, yes. Those learners will naturally make progress faster, since not everything is new. This unschooler, for instance, finally started conversations with her neighbors in their weekly meetups after a month only of joining the language unschool. The past weekend, the people in my village came together for lunch, and I was amazed at how much I can already understand them and how I responded. I know that most of my sentences are not entirely correct, but at least they can understand most of what I am trying to say, and for now, I am really happy about that, and so are they. She also told me that she had tried to talk to them since they had moved to Portugal 8 months prior, but it was only that weekend that it felt like she could have a real ongoing conversation. As for people starting out, of course they take longer since they need to understand how the language works, learn new words, learn how to learn a language, how they themselves learn. This unschooler, however, managed to understand a short story for beginners except for 2 words, which she got from context anyway. This only took her 3 months of listening first. Have you ever heard anyone say, I've been reading Portuguese for 3 months and today I listened to a short story and I understood practically everything? I honestly haven't. You can test for yourself what kind of content this unschooler was exposed to by checking out my mini start. The link is below. Now it's time for you to help me test this theory. Is reading preventing you from understanding spoken Portuguese, or am I just crazy? Okay, here's the first of 3 very short stories. Not sure I can even call them stories, but anyway. I'd like you to read it first, then record yourself reading it out loud, and then compare it with how I'm going to read it. I'll read it at 2 speeds for you to notice what I'm doing. A primeira vez que eu falei com ele, achei que ele era bocado estranho, mas agora a sério, da segunda e da terceira vez que me encontrei com ele, já o achei muito querido. A primeira vez que eu falei com ele, achei que ele era bocado estranho, mas agora a sério, da segunda e da terceira vez que me encontrei com ele, já o achei muito querido. See if you notice any differences in how you pronounce words here. For example, if you said, mas agora a sério, It shows you were reading. If you had heard me say first, mas agora a sério, you would have been better prepared to recognize it when natives speak. And this is because when you only read Portuguese without any audio input, you will be hearing the sound of the words in your head. If you haven't a solid foundation of how Portuguese sounds, then it's likely you're reinforcing the production of Portuguese in an English, French, German, or whatever way. But what if you split your attention between reading and listening? That's what we're going to do for the second mini story. Depois de ter falado com ele ao telefone sobre a festa de anos dele, fiquei preocupada com as 5.000 coisas que tenho para fazer antes do dia 15. Now ask yourself, were you focusing on the meaning of the words or how I married depois de ter into depois de ter, or festa de anos into festa de anos? And for the final mini story, I'm going to have you listen first and then read. Amanhã de manhã vai estar a chover imenso. Tanto acho que vou mesmo ter de ir à reunião. É sempre quando eu quero ir à praia. And now take a moment to read it. I'm guessing the levels of frustration were higher with this one, but let me guess the possible lessons you could learn here. You now know how we slur tomorrow morning into amanhã de manhã. You notice for the first time or confirm your suspicions that we don't always pronounce the sh at the start of estar. I said that. You notice I hardly pronounce the R in chover, or the one in sempre. Portanto was a tough one to hear, and perhaps you thought I had said important, instead. You're shocked by the fact that I pronounced mesmo as mem. You're deeply annoyed that I pronounced ter de ir as ter de ir. Now the stage is yours, in the comments section, of course. Please share how this went for you. Remember, real Portuguese doesn't come with subtitles, so you better prepare for it. My video on the King of Portuguese can be a helping hand. But you can also give listening first a try with my free mini start. You listen to a story of a couple that anyone can relate to. The link is below. I'm curious how you get on with that.